Hey everyone, welcome to a talk about the future of energy and corporate innovation. Welcome to Invincible Innovation Live Show. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm Mazor, Kario, innovation and value creation expert, and I'll be your host. And today I have a very special guest, Mickey Steiner. Mickey is the head of Eon operations in Israel. Hi, Mickey.
Hello, happy to be here.
I'm so happy that you're here, and I'm sure it's going to be really interesting. We're live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, and you're so invited to join the discussion and ask questions. And now we can start. So, what are the challenges of the industry, energy industry, right now, and what they are facing?
Well, this is the $50 million question, and as we all know, we have this phenomenon of global warming. Global warming is mainly created by the CO2 emissions of us, of the civilization. At least most of the scientists believe that this is the source. There are some arguments, but the common knowledge is that if we are able to decrease our CO2 emissions significantly, global warming will stop or at least will slow down. And this is the biggest challenge. I mean, at the global scale, this is the biggest challenge. Um, and the problem is that industrialization is rising all the time. The problem is that we have more and more vehicles on the road, and there has to be a way to stop the rise of CO2 emissions. One direction that is going to happen is, of course, that most of the vehicles are moving over to EVs, to electric vehicles. EVs, of course, have zero emissions on their own, but they use electricity. So the
Yeah,
question is now, how is this electricity produced? So it's a chain
sure,
reaction. It's not the electricity comes from the charging station, but it doesn't happen by itself.
sure.
So the biggest challenge would be to go over to produce electricity from renewable sources. I mean, everybody knows it, but I was just trying to explain why this is the situation. Many industrial plants have already transitioned to use electricity as their energy source. The biggest increase in use of energy, of electrical energy, is electric vehicles and heat pumps. These are heat pumps are used to heat and cool buildings, and with the rise of industrial buildings, etc. So the use of electricity is increasing, and thereby we need to decrease the production of electricity from fossil fuels, from
Yeah,
oil, from coal, from all these dirty fuels, which when they are being burned, they create CO2. The CO2 goes up to the atmosphere and creates this
yeah.
syndrome that we all know about, the hot house syndrome, as we call it.
Yeah. So you mentioned that there is a demand for more power. Could it really coexist with the cut in carbon emissions? So could that be where we need more and we need to cut? So what could we do?
So yes, it could. There is the Paris Agreement, which is very famous because the U.S. left it and joined it back, made the demand that to limit the rise in world temperature to less than 2 degrees centigrade, all the way up to 2050, to 2050. And the only way to do that, as I said, is to decrease emission. The only way to decrease emission is to move over to renewable energy sources. The most common renewable energy sources are solar power and wind power. There are already a lot of production plant of solar and wind, but this is really the main place where we have to significantly increase production of solar and wind. Just to illustrate, the world today is using for its energy production, 11% of the energy worldwide is produced from renewable sources, mostly solar and wind. 11%, which is very, very low. In
Yeah.
Europe, it's around 35%, which means Europe is way ahead of the rest of the world. But we need it. It needs basically it needs to rise to 65%, which is totally crazy if you think about it
Hmm.
by 2050, which is not so far away. It's only 30 years. So the main
Yeah.
challenge and the main approach has to be to move over to renewable sources, solar
But
and wind.
but this is, as you said, something really challenging. So what could help these energy companies be successful in that future? So what is really needed?
So the biggest challenge in moving to renewable sources is energy storage. Why? Because solar energy is available when the sun is shining. When the sun is going away, the solar fields stand there and don't produce any energy. Wind energy is available when the wind is blowing strongly enough, and so it depends on the level of the wind. And when there's no wind, there's no production of energy. So the challenge, on the other hand, the demand is there all the time. It's
Yeah.
also changing somewhat, but it's there all the time. So in order to provide our civilization with constant flow of energy, we have to store energy. We have to store energy when it's available and be able to release it out of storage when it's not available. Today, this is the one biggest challenge of the renewable industry, besides installing more and more and more plants. So the plants, it's something, the technology is here. The price of the solar panels has decreased significantly in the recent years. So the biggest challenge is installation of systems. Installation of systems has to be pushed by governments, by institutional investors, etc., etc. And it does make sense in terms of I mean, it is a reasonable investment because you can reach return on investment pretty fast with the price of electrical energy today. So, as I said, the biggest challenge is storage. Storage today, the main area of storage is lithium-ion batteries, which are relatively expensive, relatively polluting. Another source of storage, of course, is there are multiple other solutions like high pressure air, like pumped storage, which means when you have energy, you pump water up to a high lake, and then when there's no energy, the water is flowing down, generating energy as it comes down. So it's really highly renewable because there's no pollution associated with that. But this is really the biggest challenge. The other challenge, which is still unsolved, or at least people are putting a lot of energy into it, but it's still unsolved, is the transfer of energy from the way where it's cheap to produce it to where it's needed. So just to take an example, Europe is a huge consumer of energy because Europe has a dense civilization. The Sahara Desert can be a huge producer of energy because of the sun. So, but you can produce energy in the Sahara, but how do you package it in small packages and ship it over to Europe? It's not so easy. You
Yeah.
cannot ship electrons. Europe, an undersea cable is a very expensive solution. This is something which is still unsolved. There is a magic word that is being used more and more often in energy circles, which is hydrogen. So
Wow.
it's not
You know
only
why I'm saying why? Because we had a comment about it. Gary Nako said that storage is the key to power generation as well as power usage, for example, cars. And then he said hydrogen. So he
hydrogen,
just, yeah. So thank
right?
Gary for your comment.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
hydrogen answers two issues. One issue is of course storage because you produce hydrogen using energy, which with a system called electrolyzer. We all studied in high school. We saw how to decompose water into hydrogen and oxygen.
Yeah.
So you can create hydrogen using energy, and then you can use it using a reactor to create energy. But you can also transport hydrogen,
Hydrogen.
from cheap energy areas to high consuming areas. And this is something which is still under a lot of work, research. Can you do it in ships? Can you do it in pipelines? What is the safe way to transport hydrogen? So there are multiple solutions, but the optimal solution is still not there. But this is something that the energy industry is now working on quite intensively, because
Yeah.
once we find a cheap way, an efficient way to transport hydrogen from one place to the other, we will be able to produce energy in, let's say, Sahara. I'm just picking the Sahara. It could be the Arabian Desert and it could be the Negev. I mean, the Israeli desert. Produce it in one place and use the energy in another place.
Yeah, you mentioned Israel. We're both from Israel. So we always, I think from the 60s, maybe we had solar panels in Israel to heat the water, but we
Right.
never used it for electricity. Could you explain why? We have lots of sun most of the year.
Yeah.
So
So
how do you explain?
first of all, it's a very interesting phenomenon. We had in the 50s, there was somebody, I don't remember his name now, who invented the solar water heater. And Israel, where electricity was really scarce and still is expensive, was a great solution because it's a hot climate. Most Israelis take a shower at least once a day, so you need hot water constantly, and it's very cheap. You get it for free basically. But the solar water heater is a relatively simple contraption. I mean, you put together a pipe, a black pipe, you put it in the sun, it heats up, the water goes through it, and it becomes hot. I mean, this is the basic principle. The photovoltaic cell is something which exists for a while, but the problem was for many years it was expensive. It was relatively expensive, and the ROI, the return on investment on installing photovoltaic panels on a roof or on a field, was not good enough. Prices came down significantly, but really significantly in the recent years, mainly due to Chinese production, which is still high quality, but at much lower cost. And the market it's very available now, highly available. So that's why it became much more available. The photovoltaic power source is today much more available than it used to be in the past. So,
Yeah.
but still, there's a question, and I've been asked by many guests who arrive in Israel by planes and look down as they land, and they say, "Why don't I see many solar fields in Israel?" And it's a big question. It has to do with probably with regulation, because Israel's energy market is relatively conservative. It's changing in recent years, but it's a relatively conservative market dominated by one major energy supplier. So there were not really enough incentives for people to produce energy on their own and supply it and sell it to the electric company. It's
Yeah.
changing in the recent years, and now it's becoming. I mean, they separated the generation from the network, so now you have business endeavors, and there are quite a few companies in Israel who build and install solar fields and sell the energy
Yeah.
to the electric company.
Yeah. You know, my husband works in the electricity company in
Right.
Israel,
I
and
didn't
I
say
could
anything bad about the electric company.
we could say whatever we want, but they're not innovative as I know them. And many energy companies are really large corporates. So what is the most important element of corporate innovation success?
Yeah. So yeah, you led very nicely into this subject because so in my career, I worked for a company like SAP, which is a large software company, which considers itself highly innovative because the software company has to be innovative. And now I'm working for a power utility called E.ON, which wants to consider itself highly innovative, but it's very difficult. Um, like in the Israel Electric Company, an electric company's main goal is to supply highly available and reliable electricity to its customers. Electricity networks are what 150 years old or maybe more, from the days of Edison and Nikola Tesla, etc. And the problems of supplying, maintaining, keeping large energy networks is a huge challenge. And it's a relatively conservative situation. You have grids, you have power lines, you have transformers, etc. This in itself is a huge challenge. So a large company like that becomes by nature very conservative and is not embracing innovation as fast as it should. Now, it's not a criticism against the people, it's the fact that the utility has to be conservative because, at least in Germany, our SLA, service level agreement, is that you're not allowed to have more than 15 minutes per year power outage for your customers. Now, it doesn't exist in Israel. It for sure doesn't exist in the United States with all the storms and everything. 15 minutes per year is really almost 99 point, I don't know how many nines after the decimal point.
Yeah.
So the main challenge of the managers is to maintain the system, to keep it running, and not to have any faults. Now, innovation by itself has risks in it, because if we
Sure.
introduce a new innovative system, it could fail in the first phases of its life, even if you did a lot of tests and a lot of evaluations, etc. It's still more risky than the old-fashioned switches and transformers, etc. And this is where the challenge lies, because because a middle manager in a utility company has his own or her own KPIs, and they want to go home in peace after the day, and they want to have their weekends and their holidays. And if you come to them with innovative ideas and solutions, their natural tendency is to defer, to delay. Well, maybe not today, maybe not this week, maybe next week, and it's very natural because they have their own job to fulfill, and they want to, as we say in Israel, to come home in peace.
Yeah.
So it's this is the biggest challenge. So to
Yeah,
do
and it's threatening for them to think that they need to change, they need to do something different, that the regulations has changed, the world has changed. So the fact that they need to do things differently and they're very happy with what they're doing right now, and they're said to, like, this is damaging the earth, we need to change, we have new regulations. It's something that is bothering them because for them it's like the what they're used to have, which is very stable, is starting to change, and change is not stable, and it's risky.
the world is changing around us. Us, I mean myself as part of the utility company, even though I'm part of the innovation side of the utility company, and we have to adapt to the change. Now, if we don't adapt to the change, the world will change anyway. And you have the example of the automotive industry, which was a very conservative industry, and because change came about with autonomous driving, not necessarily fully autonomous, but with all kinds of driver support systems, it started with highly innovative mavericks like Tesla, which brought in all kinds of innovation, and the industry had to chase them and had to keep up with them. And today, the automotive industry is highly innovative. It is still conservative because they have regulations and standards, but it's very innovative. I think energy industry will follow the same direction. There will be a lot of innovation happening outside of the energy industry, which will impact the markets. A lot of renewable plants are coming up. In Europe, there are what we call the smart grid systems, where farmers and small enterprises and even private people are producing energy, and they can sell it into the system, into the grid on its own, by themselves. And not only that, they can even form independent communities. Imagine a village that pools money together and puts together a solar plant outside of the village, and supply and has a storage system and supplies the village with energy. And they say to the energy company, thanks, we have our own energy, we don't need your energy, we only use you as a backup. And the energy company is still obligated to serve them as a backup, but most of the time they will not buy energy from the utility. So
Yeah,
utility has to keep up, because otherwise it will change the scenery.
it will not be relevant. But
Right.
what you mentioned is like coming from the outside, in contrary to coming from within. So they know it's going to change. They know they need to do something, but in many cases they are not doing that. And other people from the outside, like Elon Musk, and people from not within the system, are doing things differently, or startups. So how do you explain that? They know they have the resources, they have the money, they know what the market is doing, and they're still not changing.
Well, so this statement is a bit too strong. They are changing. They are, I mean, just the fact that E.ON, which is the company I'm working for, has a presence in Israel, and the presence in Israel is looking for innovative solutions to incorporate into the operating business of E.ON. And many other utilities have presence in Israel. The Israel Electric Company has an innovation group for many years. They were, promoting startups. They were incubating startups. They were investing even in startups. So from the top level, it exists. Usually the top management supports it. The biggest challenge is not to support the innovation from inside, or even bring innovation from outside. The biggest challenge is to absorb it into the operation, to absorb it into the working ranks of the company. And if you bring something innovative to somebody who is, as I said, a middle management, usually top management supports. But if you bring it to somebody in the middle management, then you have a big challenge of convincing this manager, this person, to take the risk. And this is really the key word, to take the risk of trying something new, of adopting a new innovative solution, and trying to see how it works within the system.
Yeah.
And once it does work, of course, it increases the profitability or the efficiency. It decreases waste, etc., etc. So it's really this is the biggest challenge, convince them to try it out.
And do you think it's a matter of their KPI, what they need to do, or is it a matter of teaching them to change and to accept risk and in failures sometimes? What do you think is preventing them from doing that better?
I think it's both. I mean, you touched probably on the both points because they have the day-to-day activity. As I said before, they have to make sure, and in the utility is it's much more important than many other places because you serve people, you serve millions of customers, and they all rely on you to get their energy constantly without interruptions. So this is number one concern of any manager, and the number two concern of any manager in utility is safety, not to have damage. I mean, not to risk employees more than necessary, and they're doing really dangerous stuff sometimes. They're climbing on poles and touching high voltage wires, hopefully without the power in them, etc. So the risk is there, and they have the day-to-day activity. And now, as you said, the risk is either that something fails in the system. So KPIs, they have to produce a certain growth every year, a certain level of new installations. I mean, they have a lot of work, and the work takes up 110% of their time. And now you're coming to them, or we are coming to them with a very nice startup from Israel, with two entrepreneurs with gleaming eyes, telling them about this beautiful solution, which is really beautiful. But they are, first of all, there is this cultural difference because, and it's not only if a startup is from Israel, it could be from Switzerland, it could be from Australia, and all from the US. Startup people are usually a whole different breed than those company executives who come to work with a white shirt and well dressed. The startup people are usually people with a mission. They are driven to fulfill their mission. They believe in the value that they bring to humanity, and they will not usually will not be convinced of any negative influences, even if they are there.
Yeah.
And so, but this is the nature, and this is also the beauty of it. The difficulty for a manager in a company is to accept that something that he thought would never work does work because of a certain innovation. And I've seen it many times. I came to managers in the company with very innovative solutions, various technologies. I will not mention them specifically, but and they said, "Yeah, I know this technology for many years. It doesn't work." So my plea to him was, if you think it doesn't work and these people can show you that it works, this is exactly the place where it should raise your curiosity and say, hey, maybe they have a breakthrough. Maybe something is here that they have found, or they invented, to use a simple word that I didn't think about, and let's take a look at it. Let's embrace it. And in
Sure.
most cases, the conservatism rules, and it's not even a question of age. It's a question of mentality, or sometimes a question of age within the company. So if it's somebody who is new to the company or is changing position to another role and says, in this role I want to make a change, then he is more open to embrace innovation.
Yeah. You know what you said about the difference between an entrepreneur and someone who's working as an employee for years in the same company. It's like two very different way of thinking, and it collides, and they need each other. The entrepreneurs need the bigger companies to try out their ideas and to see if it's working within their company sometimes. And the companies, as we said, they do need to innovate. Sometimes it's really hard for them to do it from within because they try things and now they don't believe, and they have another thing like major position and role there, and they don't have time to do it all. And still the collaboration is although it's needed, it is really hard, and it needs to even sometimes to be facilitated, I guess, to really make it happen.
So this is exactly, and this is really, first of all, our main role in our group here in Israel, and we have a similar group to the one here, also in the Silicon Valley. The main role is to create, I mean, I call it dancing with the elephants. The startup, which is like a small mouse or a small rat, wants to create a dance together with this huge company. We don't speak the same language. We don't have the same values. because the startup by nature is willing to risk much more, because startup entrepreneurs risk the most important asset they have, time. So they invest 2, 3, 4 years of their lives in a startup, which is something that doesn't come back. Money goes and money comes, but life keeps going.
Yeah.
So and the company executive, all he has to invest is a certain level of risk and attention. So when you get those meetings between those two entities, you have to create a lot of translation, not only German to English, but also
Mm.
culture to culture, or German to Israeli, so to speak, but also culture to culture in terms of startup vis-a-vis large corporates. And this is really the biggest challenge. And
Yeah.
I think the way to do it, I mean, what we're doing is called, in your language, in the innovation people language, open innovation, which means you're trying to connect your operating business, be it automotive, utility, oil companies, and in Israel, as you know, there are tens or maybe hundreds of large companies not only doing R&D but also doing what we call scouting or open innovation.
Hmm.
Some of them with teams, some of them with labs, some of them with whatever ways to create this dialogue between startups with very disruptive thinking and our own company with its own sequential and conservative, relatively conservative thinking. And this is
Yeah.
really where this meeting point is where the biggest challenge is.
Yeah. I want to show again, Gary Nakos said the most innovative is already among
Right.
us, sick, the young and bright. So people are very innovative and curious about what's going to happen. And you just need to find these people that are
Yeah.
really willing to take the risk, and they're even eager to take the risk and to try a new thing. and
Yeah.
and sometimes even the same people, if you go and they're going to be an employee for 5 or 10 years within the company, these qualities will disappear in a sense, or maybe be lower, because what they are demanded to do and what is their role is not being curious, innovative, disruptive, changing the status quo, so forth, and
Yeah.
therefore they need it from the outside.
Yeah. And I agree to the comments, seek the young and bright, because even if they are within a corporate, many times the young people, the ones who are more dynamic and more intensive and not yet in the groove, so to speak, are the ones who are willing to take risk, because also they have less to risk, because after you work 15 years with a company and you have a certain level of seniority and a certain level of whatever pension and other rights, you are bigger risk. You're taking a bigger risk if you make a big mistake. If you're still young and you're coming young into the company, then you are more open to take risks, but you have less power in the company. So the balance is not working in the right direction, because the more senior you are, the more power you have, or the more influence. Maybe the word power is not good enough, but influence. Um, so yeah, seek the young and brightest is the good the comment, but it has its challenges.
So
So
let's say these people from within or from an outside open innovation come and meet these managers. So these managers in a corporate, what are they dealing with? What they face? What are the difficulties they need to face when they are meeting innovation? What are their mental challenges, or what do they need to do in order to make it happen?
it's an interesting question, because we are trying to locate within the company those specific people who are open to it. I mean, regardless of age or seniority, you find people who are more inclined to listen, to get excited about something innovative, and there are those who see it as a disruption and interference to their life and to their routine. So the secret is to look for the right people in the company. And I'm talking to colleagues who are doing this in other companies in Israel. As I said, there are many of those: automotive, energy, computing, cloud computing, anything. And we all say the same thing. We need to find the right stakeholder in the large company who is willing to embrace, or at least to support initially, something new, to give it a chance. I mean, we never bring something in and that's it. We always do a proof of concept first. We try it out with the business, and if it works, maybe not on a production system, on an offline system, and only then we put it in production. But it's really to find the right people, and it's something maybe you inherit or you grow up with. I mean, it's not something. It could be acquired to a certain extent, but only up to a certain level. I think that if you have it, you have it, and then we find the right people, we can work with them and increase it. And if you
Yeah.
don't have it, if you are very conservative, or if you're innovation um, resistant, it's almost impossible to change you.
Yeah.
And
But it means that what we're talking about is not in your title. So it doesn't mean that if it's written in your title that this is what you do, like an innovation manager, it doesn't really mean that you're exactly innovative. Sometimes it's someone who's from a head of department somewhere and he's the right person to talk to. So your work
absolutely.
is kind of challenging to find these people because it's not written on LinkedIn. We're open-minded, right?
No, it's not. And even if it's written, it's not necessarily that it's true. I mean, you really have to interact with the person. I mean, we had many experiences where we brought people to Israel, and Israel has a certain toxic influence on people, because if you bring them over here and you take them around some startups and you show them the ecosystem, as we call it, which means they talk to a couple of venture capitalists and they talk to a couple or more of startups, and they walk around Rothschild Boulevard just to get the vibe, and they get this mysterious atmosphere that, wow, things are happening here. It's really something else. I feel the energy. I heard it from many people who came over, and then they start to be more curious. And once they're becoming more curious, there's this slow process of being able to adopt more and more innovation. So it's really a change that you can create. And yeah, if management is smart, then they appoint the innovation managers, as they call them. They give it to the right people, to people who are keen to solve and to find innovative solutions.
Yeah, and
I
they
don't
are
know if you
able
want to.
to
I
speak
don't.
to these people. So they
Right.
have the common language.
I just want to say, I don't know if this is the flow of the talk we have, but we always differentiate between disruptive innovation and incremental innovation, which is really a huge change. And this is really, incremental innovation can happen within companies, but disruptive innovation usually, probably 90% of the cases, would come from the outside. So if you cannot embrace and interact with the outside innovation world, then it's hard to bring in disruptive innovation into the company. And then you're
Yeah.
doomed to become a Kodak, as one example, or a DEC Computers, PDP. If some of the audience remembers, it was a very famous computer company in the past which disappeared. So these companies did not did not adopt disruptive innovation. I mean, Kodak was selling films when digital cameras were already here. So it was then a decision: do we move over to the digital world or do we not? And they did not. And this yellow square that was in so many shops all over the world disappeared.
Yeah. And like I think that what we're talking about is mainly a challenge of accepting change and the fact that it doesn't matter if we want to and we want to welcome it or if we resist it, if we are risk averse, if we don't like changes, it doesn't matter. The change will happen.
Right.
And we are, as people within these companies, we need to really be able to adjust to it and to be willing to accept that things are changing and not say, okay, like right now we're doing everything just fine. We know what we're doing and we don't want to even think about another option. And they're very small. They're not taking much of our market. They're very like in the sides. We can ignore them and so forth. This is what
Yeah, and,
happens, I guess.
and and coming back to the beginning of our talk, in the energy industry, the feeling was many years, and your husband in the Israel Electric Company can attest to that. That hey, we're safe. Electricity is something that we know how to produce. We sell it. Nobody can compete with us because of the size and the power that we have. Power in both directions. Power in terms of force and power in terms of electric power. So we're immune, and this was for 200 years the situation. But then suddenly alternative systems came around. Regulation changed, which is really this is the biggest aspect, because as long as regulation promotes the monopoly, you cannot do
Of
anything.
course.
regulation changed. Texas is one of the places which is most obvious, but also in Europe, in Germany, it's happening. And suddenly they are finding competition all around them. So they have no choice but to adopt. Otherwise, they will lose.
Yeah.
They will lose the game.
It looks like what we need in order to make the world better or change, not always to the better, but going forward, you need to be open-minded and open to new things, and really understanding that you might know a lot, but you don't know everything. You need other people in order to do that. And we have another comment from Gary, and he's talking about bravo, diversity and inclusivity. There is a balance to value everyone brings, and I think that we understand that these people who were like God within their companies,
Right.
like we know everything. They understand that the hierarchical way of thinking, that this is what we're doing, we know everything, we don't need anyone from the outside, is changing. And
Right.
people do that and say, okay, we need
Right.
other people.
And with the availability of, and we always say, internet became made the world flat, and everyone can find any knowledge that they need on the internet. So getting human knowledge is easy at your fingertips. Now the point is, are you creative enough to make out of the existing human knowledge something new, which did not exist until today, and which is what we call disruptive. And if you find something disruptive like this, you can, you're, first of all, you're standing out, but you have to win the confidence of the people in the corporate if you want to sell it to a corporate. Steve Jobs did not want to sell it to, he wanted to sell Apple to Microsoft, and they threw him down the stairs because he was young and cheeky, and they said, no, this will never take off. And Bill Gates until today said about Apple that it will not happen, and
Yeah,
look where Apple is today. So the point is, yes, to be diversity is very important, and not only diversity, but dialogue and exchange and listening, even to the youngest kid who is part of the team. But also accepting that that you're not God, as you said before. You're not God, even though you're a senior executive in a company. Listen to those people from the outside because they can bring you the light, as we say.
yeah. So, what is the most surprising thing you learned after so many years in innovation and with companies you work with?
What is the most surprising thing?
Yeah,
The most surprising thing is, I think, that the most innovative ideas can come from the least expected sources. I mean, we have seen. I mean, we looked for a while into we. I mean, in energy, in here in the investment group, we looked into construction tech, which means as you know, the construction industry is a very conservative energy industry. As somebody told me, our construction people are doing the same work that our forefathers did in Egypt, putting one brick on top of the other and building a building. So
yeah,
it's changing. It's not as conservative as it used to be, but still there's a lot of change needed. And we saw ideas coming out of totally unexpected places of how to improve the process of construction and the monitoring of construction, etc., which were really amazing. So the surprising part is innovation will not come from the place you expect. It will come from the least expected places of smart people who think about something. They're not sure it will work, but if they have enough courage or enough determination, they will go after it, and they will find innovative solutions. And
yeah,
and many startups that we met are based on this kind of phenomenon, that people said, well, it looks to me intuitively that it should work. Let's try out how it works. And then of course comes technology and science and everything else
yeah,
to make it happen. But the
yeah,
basic spark is something that no wonder that we call it spark, or
yeah.
this image of a light bulb going up above your head.
Yeah, I think that this kind of character or skill, maybe, but this kind of thinking is something that we need more and more, and we need to teach young people how to think differently and how to be sure about what they're doing, even if they don't get a good feedback at the beginning, and have grit, to go through these ups and downs and do that. And the fact that people need to be open minded in general, I think, is very important for our world. which is changing all the time. It doesn't matter if I'm a manager in a corporate or just a person living in this world, and we need it. And there is this phrase in English, and that the life is unfolding in front of you. Like that's
Mhm.
really what's happening. You never really know what's happening. We don't have that saying in
Right.
Hebrew, but I really love it. And this is something you need in business too, and in life, just to see the life unfolding, see the options, see the things changing, and really be happy with the change, and not trying to resist it or take it back or as it was, or being
Yeah.
open-minded.
I think this is one part. The other part is never stop to ask questions. And there's this famous thing, I don't remember who it was, when his kid came back from the kindergarten. He didn't ask him, what did you learn in school today? But what good question did you ask in school today? Which is really, and
Yeah,
kids always ask questions. Small children always ask why, and the parents
yeah,
get nervous and they just to try to
yeah.
brush the kid
Sometimes they
away.
don't know why, right?
Or
They
sometimes they
just
don't
say
know.
that's it.
Today you have you can find it out at your
Sure.
fingertips. You have the know-how of mankind. You have at your fingertips. So I think if you encourage the children to ask why, and if you don't know the answer, you say to the kid, okay, you know what? Let's take tonight a couple of hours. Let's look at the internet. Let's find out why. I have no idea why the elephant has this long nose. Why? How did it happen? Why does it need it? But let's try to find out. And if you encourage young people to ask and ask and ask and ask, it means you never take it for granted, because it
Yeah,
means that anything is up to question, to be questionable, and then you create curious people.
sure.
And it goes back to also to high school and even higher education, not only to teach them the principles of science, but to try and promote them or encourage them to not to take it for granted. Why is it happening? How come? And if science has the answers, great. If not, let's look for it.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's been really, really interesting talking to you, and I feel like we could do another hour with that. And I want to thank you for your time. So, where could people hear more about what you're doing, and the EON operation in Israel, if they want to learn more?
Well, first of all, LinkedIn, where I guess we are broadcasting now, and where you can find me always, Mickey Steiner on LinkedIn. And I'm working for Eon in Israel. So through LinkedIn, the best way is would be to reach me, and then take it from there. So I'd be happy to respond or to interact with anybody who found what I said interesting, or who wants to further explore what we're talking about.
Yeah, so I want to thank you for your time. It's been very interesting and fun for me to talk to you. So thank you, and
Thank
I hope
you. Thank you,
our
Adi.
roads will cross again, I hope, in the future. I want to thank Gary Neko for all his questions and comments, which is like always really great to see that people are interested in asking,
Right.
and saying what they're thinking, which is so important for me. And to all of you change makers out there, thank you for joining us. If you want to learn more about my work, you're invited to invincibleinnovation.com, and I'll see you next week with another initiative, insightful talk. See ya.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.